The Dybbuk Box has been called the most haunted, most cursed object in the world. It's also been called a complete fabrication and a hoax. So, which is it? It might be a little bit of both, actually. The Dybbuk Box is a living, breathing creation, and I'm not talking about the box itself, the one in Zach Bagans' Haunted Museum. I'm talking about the story that surrounds it. The story that has been told and continues to be told online, in print, and in movies. Welcome to History, Mystery, and the Unexplained, the show where we look at everything from true crime to cryptids, the paranormal, and beyond. Today, we're going to look at the legend of the Dybbuk Box. Originally, I was going to do several allegedly cursed objects for this episode, including the Hope Diamond, Otzi the Iceman, and the Crying Boy painting. But we're going to shelve those for now, and we'll take a look at them later. Because the more I read about the Dybbuk Box, the more I felt that this story needed a more detailed exploration. And I realized that the Dybbuk Box story has been told a lot. But that's exactly why I want to examine it in detail, so we can look at all aspects of this legend in one place and really do a deep dive. But before we get started, please like, subscribe, follow, or whatever on the platform of your choice. And be sure to give us a review. I'd love to hear what you think. The tale of the Dybbuk Box begun where all great legends are born, eBay. In 2003, a post appeared on eBay advertising a Dybbuk haunted Jewish wine cabinet box. The owner was Kevin Mannis, a writer and furniture restorer. As the story goes, Kevin was at an estate sale in Portland, Oregon in 2001, when he found a wine cabinet that he wished to restore, along with a sewing box and a few other pieces of furniture. The sale was being held by the granddaughter of a woman who had passed at the age of 103. She was a survivor of the Holocaust from Poland who came to America via Spain. She was the only member of her family that had escaped the tragedies of war, making her way to Spain and eventually emigrating to America. She brought with her only three things from the old world: the wine cabinet, or Dybbuk box, the sewing box, and a trunk. The granddaughter recalled that her grandmother would keep the liquor cabinet in her sewing room, just out of reach of the children, and she would warn them never to open it. It's a liquor cabinet. It's filled with spirits, and I'm not talking about dead people. Children should not touch it. But the strangeness started when the original seller, i.e. the old woman's granddaughter, approached Kevin and said, "I see you bought the Dybbuk box. Seems like a strange way to start a conversation, especially if you're trying to get rid of the thing. Oh, I see you've purchased the demon that's been plaguing my family for decades." There was a bit of a back and forth, and Manna offered to let her keep it for sentimental reasons. But she had some sort of breakdown and said, "No, you made a deal. You bought it." Ominous as this was, Mannis took everything to his furniture restoration business, where he planned to restore the cabinet and give it to his mother as a gift. He left it in the basement of his shop and went to run some errands, leaving one of his employees in charge, a young woman who's unnamed in the legend. A half hour after he left, Mannis got a phone call from his employee. She was in hysterics. Someone was in the basement with her. She couldn't see anyone, but she could hear swearing and shouting, and glass was exploding all around her. She was trapped. Something or someone had locked the iron gate in front of the shop and the emergency exits. There was no way for her to escape. Manus pleaded with her to call the police, but his words fell to deaf ears when the phone suddenly cut off. Frantic, he rushed back, speeding along the highway at 100 miles an hour. He flew into the store, unlocking the doors when he arrived, and he searched for the intruder, finding only his employee, cowering in the corner, tears streaming down her face. When the doors opened, she seized the opportunity to rush out the door, never to return to work again, thus terminating her 2 years of employment that very second. Manus found the basement dark. Glass crunched under his feet. Every bulb was shattered. The entirety of the room had a foul stench like ammonia or cat urine. As disturbing and bizarre as this moment was for Manus and his salesperson, at the time, he did not connect this with the Dybbuk box he had purchased. He continued with his plan to restore the wine cabinet for his mother. Upon opening the cabinet for the first time, he found 2 wheat pennies from the 1920s. 2 locks of hair, one blonde and one black, both bound in string. A golden wine goblet, a dried rosebud, and an iron candlestick. And a granite statue engraved with the word Shalom. It sounds like the pieces of some strange version of Clue. It was Miss Scarlet in the parlor with the Shalom statue. At this point, despite his original plan to refinish the cabinet, given the quality and craftsmanship of the work, he chose instead to simply clean it and polish the woodwork. This was when he found an engraving in Hebrew on the back. He did not know what it said, but he also chose not to research it any further. I mean, I know Google was in its infancy, but he could have asked Jeeves. Flash forward to October. A few days after his mother's birthday, Halloween 2001 to be exact, his mother came into the shop to get her gift and have lunch with her son. Kevin gave her her present and stepped out of the room for a few minutes to take care of some business. Well, she examined it. Moments later, an employee rushed into his office to tell him something was wrong with his mother. Quickly, the two went back to the other room to see what was going on, and Kevin Manus found his mother slumped into a chair, staring straight ahead, tears streaming down her unmoving face. An ambulance was called, and she was whisked away to the hospital, having suffered from a stroke. She had partial paralysis and suffered from speech loss. She still had cognition, however, and she was able to answer questions and otherwise communicate by pointing at letters. During a visit with his mother, a few days later, she looked at her son with fear in her eyes and spelled out, "No gift." Kevin thought maybe his mom had forgot about the lovely wine cabinet that housed the demon that he had given her and reminded her of it. Her eyes deepened. "Hate gift," she spelled. Kevin laughed. "Sorry, Mom, I'll get you something better. Just please get well." After that, he gifted the Dybbuk box to just about every member of his family, and each and every time they returned it to him after 2 or 3 days, with some complaint about the box. Either it smelled bad, or they had a bad feeling around it, or they started having nightmares of an old hag at the same time it came into their possession. He then sold it to a middle-aged couple that came into the store, and 3 days later, he went to open the shop and found it sitting outside his front door with a note on it that said, "This has a bad darkness." Having run out of people to give it to and not being able to sell it, he decided to take it home. At this point, Kevin became plagued by horrible nightmares. Every night he would dream that he was walking with one of his loved ones. It wasn't always the same person, but always someone he was close to, someone he loved. He would stop and they would look into each other's eyes. Behind the eyes of whoever it was darkness. Something evil stared back at him, and that evil would manifest itself into a gruesome, demonic old hag that would immediately turn on him and start savagely beating him. He would wake sore and covered in bruises as if it was real. To this point, he still did not ascribe any of the strangeness to the wine cabinet. The connection finally came when a couple relatives came to spend the night. His sister, his brother, and his brother's wife. The morning after they slept over, they had all gathered in the kitchen for breakfast. His sister told him about the horrible dream she'd had. She'd had it several times before, but that was months ago. She described it exactly the same as Kevin's own dream. Kevin's brother and sister-in-law then came in, and they stated that they too had had the dream. Kevin even discovered that his girlfriend had had the dream, and they worked to unravel what common thread there was. It was revealed that in every instance, they were in the presence of the Dybbuk Box. Things continued to escalate for Kevin Mannis. He started to see shadow figures around his house, as did his guests. Trying to rid himself of the darkness, he took the box out to his shed in the backyard. That night, he was awoken by a fire alarm. It was his shed. He rushed outside, but there was no smoke or flame. Again, he smelled cat urine in the air. He grabbed the Dybbuk box and brought it back inside. He wanted to destroy it, but he feared what it could mean for whatever was trapped inside, whatever had been plaguing him and his family. He took to the internet looking for answers and fell asleep at his computer. Again, he had the dream. He woke up and he felt the presence of someone behind him. Something was breathing on the back of his neck. Now, everything up to this point is what Kevin Mannis posted on eBay to sell the Dybbuk box. It was the story as he painted it, ending with the statement that he understands that there are people out there who have more knowledge than he does about such situations, who actively search for objects like this. And he was right. Today, if you search eBay for Dybbuk box, you'll find big ones and small ones, red ones and blue ones, new, old, silver, gold. You'll find it all. What you won't find is anything predating 2003. You'll even find stores that exclusively sell Dybbuk boxes. The first sale of the original, which is often overlooked because it's more of a cursory part of the story, not much happened. It sold to a college student at Truman State University in Missouri named Yusuf Nitschke for $140. Yusuf kept an online journal to document the strange happenings that occurred while he was in possession of the Dybbuk box. He also included more reasonable reasons for why these things could have occurred. Within less than a year, the box was back on eBay, and it sold again, this time to another author and museum curator, Jason Haxton. Jason was actually the curator of the museum at the same university as Nitschke. Nitschke doubled his money. He got $280, which is not a bad ROI for a college student. But this is where the story really takes off. Jason Haxton wrote a book based on his experiences. as well as additional conversations that he had with Kevin Mannis. And the legend expanded. Allegedly, Mannis was able to track down an elderly woman named Sophie, who knew the original origins of the Dybbuk box, or boxes, I should say. At this point, there's 10 of them now. We'll get to that. Sophie and Havala. Havala is our OG Polish grandma that died at 103. Along with several other women, would have regular seances back in 1938, where they summoned a spirit to help the Jews fight the Nazis. But they found that they couldn't control it. The spirit, or Dybbuk, broke free and terrorized the world. Allegedly, it is responsible for evil all around the globe. Eventually, the women were able to contain the spirit, and they divided its soul into 10 boxes. The one Kevin bought was one of those 10. If all the boxes are ever found and reunited, it will turn into some sort of Dybbuk Voltron and some shit and attack the world. And we'll have to call the Polish Ghostbusters again to contain it, I guess. From here, Haxton, well, first he buried it, but then he dug it up and gave it to Zach Baggins, donating it to his museum. Now, if you're not familiar with Zach Baggins, he's a ghost hunter, TV personality, museum curator, among other things. Having the Baggins seal of approval today is much like having approval of the Warrens in the 70s. To some, this is the end-all be-all of legitimacy. To others, it's proof that it's fake, because many believe he's a hack. I'm not here to judge Zach Baggins. I'm here to talk about a Dybbuk box. Up to this point, we have Mannis, who wanted to create a story and make a sale. We have Haxton, who wrote a book, which led to a movie, a few movies actually, which he and Mannis were consultants for. And we have Zach Baggins, who's Zach Baggins. This is the type of stuff that he makes a living off of. The story that struck me, though, came from the artist rapper Post Malone. Mostly because he'd have nothing to gain from making stuff up. His story comes from a visit to Zach Baggins' museum. Mind you, Post Malone didn't even touch the Dybbuk box. Zach Baggins touched the box, and Post Malone put his hand on Zach's shoulders. The following month, Malone was in a bad car accident. A plane that he was on had to make an emergency landing, and his house was broken into. So a series of unfortunate events followed that time. Do I believe it was a Dybbuk? Absolutely not. Why? Well, simple. Let's start with the fact that Dybbuks don't possess boxes or forcibly get put in boxes or whatever. In Jewish folklore, a Dybbuk is a disembodied human spirit that is trapped on earth to wander in the afterlife as a result of its sins. It takes possession of a body of a living human being, or cohabitates with a living human being, until it completes a task or is exorcised from the body. Secondly, and this is a big one, Kevin Mannis came forward and said that he made the whole thing up. In 2021, in an interview with writer Charles Moss, Mannis said, "I am a creative writer. The Dybbuk Box is a story that I created. And the Dybbuk Box story has done exactly what I intended for it to do when I posted it 20 years ago, which is become an interactive horror story in real time." He added new elements to the Dybbuk Box story over the years to help evolve it, keep it relevant and interesting. Furthermore, Kenny Biddle did a deep dive for Skeptical Inquirer, where he studied the box in Baggins Museum and found that it didn't originate in Spain, but rather New York. It's a minibar from the late 50s or 60s, manufactured by the Kiroff Original Company. And I realize that in the beginning of this episode, I alluded to some sort of validity to this legend, as I did with the Post Malone story and all of his misfortunes. This is not just baiting you to watch to the end. And this may be me perpetuating the legend, expanding upon it, like so many others have done before. But I believe what we could be dealing with is something akin to a tulpa. A tulpa is a materialized being or thought form created by intense concentration. In other words, so many people have believed in it for the last 20 plus years that they've actually willed it into existence. It's just a theory. Something to think about. It's also possible that it's just a bunch of hogwash and coincidence, and it's an urban legend born of the internet, like the nun's head in a box or the sleep experiments on Russian soldiers. That's it for today, folks. Until next time, I'm Chris Grenowitz. This is History, Mystery, and the Unexplained. And thank you for listening.